The pilot's room, a true story. The pilot had seen things that most men will never see. Once, halfway across the Atlantic, flying a 777 at 35,000 feet, he saw a blood-red moon rise into a black sky, and for a moment he could not breathe. It was as if there was nothing else in the universe, just the red moon in the black sky and his aircraft. And once, flying east to west, unravelling time, he had seen the double sunrise, watched the sunrise twice on the same day. And it was as if he was not travelling high above the Indian Ocean, but through time itself. And once he had been flying in the high latitudes, when the sky erupted around him into a swirl of green, blue and white, and he was not looking at the northern lights, he was inside them. It was difficult to explain the wonders he had witnessed. The pilot had taken photographs of these earthly miracles, but it was not the same as being there. It could never be the same. So in the end, he stopped talking about it, and he stopped taking photographs. And he stopped trying to explain the beauty and the mystery of all he had seen, because only another pilot would really understand. The pilot woke before dawn while his family was still sleeping. After a month on standby, waiting in vain for the call to take the place of a scheduled pilot, he realised he was hungry to fly again. He shaved, showered and decided that breakfast could wait until he was at the airport. Then he got his bicycle out of the shed and wheeled it down the drive. Outside the house next door, a fat man in a suit and tie was standing next to his car, watching the pilot with an amused grin. This was the pilot's next door neighbour, George, who was always tickled to see the pilot getting on his bicycle. George licked his index finger and pretended to gauge the direction of the wind. "Good tailwind today, Captain. Careful, we're expecting some turbulence around the Hanger Lane gyratory. Please keep your bicycle clips on at all times during the journey." The pilot smiled politely, the sound of George's laughter ringing around inside his bicycle helmet. The pilot had shown George his photographs when he had first moved in. The blood-red moon in the pitch-black sky, the double sunrise, the northern lights. But George was something in the city, and there was no way that he could really understand. The pilot strolled through the airport. He was dressed to fly, white shirt, blue tie, and the silver wings on his blue double-breasted jacket. The jacket had 3 stripes on the sleeves because the pilot was a senior first officer. On his head, he wore a peaked cap that contained an important document, the pilot's roster for the month. The hat might look as if it was for show, but it contained the pilot's immediate future. Also in there, under the roster, was a photograph of his wife and their small son. It was the start of the summer months and Terminal 5 departures was at its busiest. The pilot did not notice the old man until he was standing right in front of him. The old man did not look as though he was flying anywhere today. He looked as though he was lost and had been lost for many years. He was very thin, unshaven, and when he smiled at the pilot, he revealed teeth like broken tombstones. His smell was strong, like a broken bottle of wine on a dirty pavement. That was what the pilot noticed most of all, the smell of the old man. The pilot nodded briskly and stepped to the side, trying to go around the old man. But the old man moved with him, surprisingly nimble for someone who smelled like a smashed case of Sauvignon Blanc. The old man nodded in sly recognition at the pilot's silver wings, and then he looked the pilot in the eye. "Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter-silvered wings," said the old man, his voice like a dead body dragged across gravel. "Put out my hand and touch the face of God." The pilot stared in disbelief at the old man. "What?" he said. "What do you mean?" It was as if someone had seen the red moon rise in the black sky, or watched the double sunrise, or flown through the northern lights. It was as if some unmet stranger, some unknown brother, had seen all of these things with the pilot and understood. Then the police were there, 2 of them, an inspector and a sergeant. The police at Heathrow are the most heavily armed in the country, and both the inspector and the sergeant carried Heckler & Koch MP5 submachine guns, Glock handguns, handcuffs, taser guns and extendable telescopic truncheons. But they smiled at the old man with infinite kindness. "Come on, Dad, the sergeant gently chided. "Don't bother the nice young pilot." "Now, we've talked to you about harassing the pilots, haven't we, Dad?" said the inspector. The old man looked desperate and secretly angry. "I wasn't harassing him," he said, "and I do not believe I'm your father." The policeman chuckled good-naturedly. The old man glanced swiftly at the pilot and began to edge away. "Wait a minute," the pilot said. "What did you say? What do you mean? What are those words?" But the old man was already melting into the crowd, so he turned to the policeman. "What did he say to me?" the pilot said. But they did not answer the pilot. They were wondering what they should do about the old man. "Poor old boy," said the sergeant. "Yes," agreed the inspector. "They say he used to be a pilot." The sergeant nodded. "That's right. And I used to be Hugh Hefner." "Horrible it was. All those bunnies up at the Playboy Mansion, they wouldn't leave me alone." Their Heckler and Koch submachine guns jiggled with their laughter. Then the inspector looked serious. "I don't want to get a court order out on him, but I will if he keeps this up," he said. "He's loitering at the airport for no valid reason, and that's not allowed." "You want me to call outreach?" the sergeant asked. The inspector shook his head. "The old man's not homeless," he said. "He just loves being at the airport." "What was that all about?" the pilot said. "What did he mean? Dance the skies on laughter-silvered wings." But the old man was gone, and the two policemen didn't know what he was talking about. They began to wander away, and the pilot knew that his question was pointless because he knew exactly what the old man had meant. The pilot's hat was endlessly useful. Not only did he keep his flying roster in the lining, but the deep interior was perfect for storing his belongings. When he passed through the special security area for flight crew, located on the far side of BA's first-class check-in desks, the pilot would have been lost without his hat. Beyond security, he went immediately to the crew report centre, found a vacant computer and swiped in with his ID card. The screen confirmed that the pilot was flying to Paris today and that he would be staying over, the first of 10 nights he would spend away from home this month. He discovered which of the airline's 350 captains he would be flying with and smiled at the name that appeared. They had flown together twice before, and the pilot had appreciated the older man's calm wisdom and flying experience. It was always good to get on with your captain, the pilot thought. After all, they were going to be locked behind a bulletproof door together for several hours. The pilot looked at the flight plan, checked the weather and printed out the flight map. He walked down to the room where the flight crew were meeting, and when it was time, together they all walked through to the terminal gate. The sun shone bone white on the nose of their aircraft as they loaded 6 tons of Jet A1 aviation fuel. The pilot went back to the cabin to look at the 50 Elvis impersonators they were carrying. The sight made him smile, and then, 5 minutes ahead of schedule, they slipped the surly bonds of Earth. The airport never really slept, the pilot thought. It only closed its eyes and waited for the dawn. And the old man was there, as the pilot somehow knew he would be. They stood looking at each other for a while, and it was the pilot who spoke first. "It's a poem," he said. "I went to the English bookstore on the Rue de Rivoli. They didn't have it for sale, but I found that much out." He shrugged. "All I know is his name." The old man nodded. "John Gillespie McGee, Jr., he said. "Born 1922, died 1941. The pilot was stunned. Dead at 19, and he wrote like that? How is that even possible? The old man revealed his ruined teeth. "The war, you see," he said. Then the 2 policemen were there, the inspector and the sergeant, smiling kindly above their weapons. "Is everything lovely here?" the sergeant said. The old man looked at them with a flash of fear, but the pilot nodded. "We're all right," he said. "Everything's fine, officer." The policemen went on their way, treading softly as they moved through the weary travellers and tenderly cradling their submachine guns as if they were babes in arms. In the empty bar of an airport hotel, there were 3 stories told that night. First, the pilot told the story of how it had begun for him. How he'd grown up on the border of East End and Essex, under the flight path to Heathrow, and he had felt like he had spent his entire childhood looking up at the skies. He kept seeing the planes. "What do you fly?" the old man asked, sipping coffee but smelling of wine. "Triples," the pilot said. "Boeing 777s, the old man smiled, and his watery eyes got a faraway look. "Beautiful aircraft, large engines, long body, low-hanging landing gear. "That's the one," the pilot said. Then the old man told his story. It was a story of a broken marriage, a broken family, and a broken man. And finally, the old man told the story of John Gillespie McGee Jr., who on the 3rd of September 1941 wrote a poem after taking his Spitfire up to 30,000 feet. McGee had scribbled the poem on the back of a letter to his parents, an American father and an English mother. He was killed in his Spitfire 2 months later. John was a pilot, the old man said, but you guessed that much. Of course. Like us, the old man said. The bar was empty now. Even the airport was silent. The old man held his breath, waiting for the younger man's answer. "Yes," the pilot agreed finally. "Just like us." His wife was still awake when he got home from the Paris run. She went online and found the poem immediately. She read it and told him that it was beautiful. "High in the sunlit silence," she said, "just like you." He hugged her and laughed out loud and told her how happy he was to be home, and he told her that she was beautiful too. His wife printed the poem out for him before his next run, and from that day on, like so many things that were important to him, the roster of his next flights, the picture of his family, and the keys to his front door, when he was passing through security, the pilot kept the poem inside his cap. High flight. "Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter-silvered wings. Somewhat I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds and done 100 things you have not dreamed of, wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air. Up, up, the long, delirious, burning blue. I've topped the wind-swept heights with easy grace, where never lark or ever eagle flew. And while with silent lifting mind I've trod the high untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God." John Gillespie McGee, Jr. He never saw the old man again. Months later, he was told by one of the policemen the airport security had found the old man unconscious in a stairwell and he had died on the way to hospital. The pilot went to see the stairwell for himself. It overlooked the north runway. The pilot stood there for quite a while. It was a good place to watch the planes.